Hey everyone. So in today's interview, I am speaking to Clint Chico, who is a teacher at an inner city art school outside of Detroit, but is also a published author. So this one is for you if you have been thinking about starting your book, but you're not sure kind of where to start or how to like push through that fear. He will probably tell you what I'm going to tell you. Just do it. Just take a little bit of time every day, write, for 10, 15 minutes. And before you know it, that book will be on your computer ready to be published. Now, my podcast is called Teacher Mindset because it is all about helping teachers become stronger in their mindset, reminding you to take care of yourself because that's the only way you can take care of your kids. And if that is something you'd be interested in, then please check out all my interviews. They are with amazing, amazing teachers, maybe some former teachers, but there's always like some tips and tricks for you in there. So I would love for you to like, subscribe, leave a comment. It always, of course, helps push us up into the algorithm. All right, without further ado, let's get to speaking with Clint. Hey, teachers and parents. In this episode, we are talking to Clint Chico, who is not only a high school video production teacher at an inner city art school outside of Detroit, Michigan, but is also an author of a series of novels. So if you've ever been thinking about finally starting that book, then this interview is for you. Clint, thank you so much for being here today. How are you?
I'm doing great. Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Good. No problem. I'm so glad you could be here. So I think let's start with the writing journey. Did you always want to be a writer, or did it sort of just happen?
Well, I've always been creative. Even, as a little kid, I would come up with my own stories when I was playing with my toys and that kind of thing. I never really thought of myself as a writer, though. At a very early age, I fell in love with movies and the idea of, working with video and making movies and things like that. Um, and drawing and comic books and things. I
Right.
think partly too because my spelling and my penmanship when I was a kid is atrocious. Um, so I did some writing, creative writing in high school and stuff, but I never really thought about becoming an author. And if you told me that I was, I would sit here with not only one novel under my belt, but 10, I would have thought that's crazy. But I got into, I had an idea for a book in 2020 and I started writing, and it's incredibly addictive, and I haven't been able to stop since.
Wow. How did you get the inspiration? Did you sort of always have a book, were you always sort of wanting to write a specific story, or did this sort of, a day of a moment of inspiration hit you?
So it's weird, yeah. I make videos and things, and I hit ideas come and go and that kind of thing all the time. But this was the first time, so I'm sitting in 2020, a lot of time on my hands, just like everybody else. My wife is away with a friend for like weeks on end, because they're secluding into their little cabin
Okay.
on the lake, and so it's just me. And I happen to be working on something else, and this is the first time where an idea just pops in my head while I'm working on something else, and I see a girl who's young, and she's laying in the middle of a football field, and she turns to her best friend and she says, "I think I might be gay." And it hit me like, I was like, I got an idea for a book. And I had to be slow down. You have an idea for a character. And so, but again, I'd never been like hit with an idea like that. And so
Right.
I had to sit and before I started typing, who is she? Why is she on this field? How old is she? Tell me, and get that formulated before that way I could figure out, is there enough there for a book? Because my wife had always said, well, you should write a book. I'm sure it'd be very good. Um, but I'd never really felt the inspiration for it. The girl turned out to be Marcia Torres. She was the first character I came up with, and My Name is Marcia is the first novel. And I literally sat and did nothing but write for like weeks on end, and I cranked it out
Wow.
in less than a month, which that's that just doesn't happen. But yeah, so after that, it again, like I said, once I started, I don't know how to stop. It's just that
Right.
much fun and addictive. And the more you write, the more the ideas come.
So I imagine with 10 books, are they all about Marcia, or do you have other different books in there as well?
So with the Marcia books, I really fell in love with the characters. Oh, sorry. I really
That's
fell in love with the
okay.
characters. And so the first book is her freshman year. I don't wanted to keep writing. Um, I did the freshman year, another book sophomore year. My mom, who is a retired middle school teacher and looks through all my books and stuff before I publish them, she's like my beta reader. Um, she's like, not everybody wants to read a series. You should write some standalones. And of course, mom
Ah,
is right. So
yeah.
my first few books were all Marcia books. And then I wrote a book called Art School Blues, which is sort of a high school romance take on Romeo and Juliet. I teach at the School of the Arts. I said, oh, let's set it in the School of the Arts. I want to do Romeo and Juliet in the School of the Arts. But all the books that I write, the one thing they have in common is that all my characters are LGBTQ. A lot of my
Okay.
students are, my kids are. And I know how important representation is in media.
Right.
And so I wanted, when I started the writing, I want to write books that my students can read. I want to write books that I can put my name on and put up in my classroom and be proud of them. And at the same time, I don't want to write books that are just like thousands and thousands of other books that are out there. I don't want to write books about guys like me, straight, white, old guys, because there's tons of books like that out there. Um, so even though Art School Blues is a kind of a sad romance. Island Games is an adventure game or adventure story. In January, I just put out my first fantasy novel. So they're all a little bit different, but they all have that in common in that there's a lot of representation, both in orientation and diversity in race and gender in all my books. So not the
Nice.
same plot line through all of them, but that
Right.
tone and feeling is all there.
I remember you telling me before about Island Games. I think that's the one. Is it like Survivor? Because
Yeah.
yeah, that one sounds really really interesting. And are all the
So
contestants younger, or how does that storyline go?
so I'm a big fan of Survivor. I write stories with teenagers, right? I'm watching with my wife, and I thought, what if it's, teenagers on Survivor? And then I'm like, that's okay. It's a good start, but that's kind of already been done a bunch. Jeff Probst actually has novels out there that are teenagers on Survivor.
Oh,
Um,
really? I didn't know that.
yeah, they're like called Stranded or something. They're not
Okay.
Survivor related, but they've got that vibe. I think they're middle school books. But then I thought, okay, I like to play, I go with my students all the time. We talk about reality TV and things like that. And the fact that not everything is real on reality TV shows, right? So they don't even like calling it reality and, professionally, they call it unscripted. So
Okay.
what if you have a reality TV show where nothing is real? And I happened to earlier this week I met with a middle school group. One of our local high middle schools has an LGBTQ group, and I sat to talk with my books and stuff. And I was talking to them about Island Games, and I said, you have teenagers who are on a show like Survivor, except they get there and they find out the entire show is fake. The whole thing is a cover for something, you know,
Yeah, don't want to
nefarious
give away
going
too
on.
much. Yeah, except the
And they
nefarious,
all went,
exactly.
ooh, that sounds cool, you know.
That
So
does
yeah, I
sound
like to take
cool.
conventions and kind of play with them some. I like the twists and turns that you can put in there.
Amazing. Oh, yeah, those they sound fantastic. I definitely I've been telling my friends who also have teenage students who like to read about them as well. I think it's such a great idea. I want to ask you, what was your most like effective marketing strategy to get the books noticed? Like how did you get feedback?
Yeah.
Yeah, how did you market them?
Once you start writing, you realize two things really quickly. Number one, every writer has their own way of doing things. And I try and explain that to people who are just starting because I mean, I've only been writing novels for like 4 years, but you do 10 of them and you figure some stuff out. The other thing you realize is that everyone has the same problem, which is, okay, I wrote this. How do I get people to read this? Right.
Mm.
So there are, the, an author's two best friends are social media because it's free and word of mouth. So luckily, my village is vast, and I've got a lot of support from my friends and family, and my support group, between coworkers and friends. Um, everybody, I got to meet the group, the middle school group, the other day because a friend of mine who works in that district gave the counselor there a copy of Marcia, and my cousin's wife has a sister who, works in the district. And so they're like, we read Marcia, we'd really love to cook, so that kind of thing. So
Cool.
getting your book mentioned, getting it out, it's a very slow process though. Marcia has been around for about 4 years, and people are still discovering it. So you've got to kind of be patient with that and understand that, a lot of authors don't really hit it big until 5 years, 10 years, 12 years down the road after they've got a bunch of novels in there. So I want as many people as possible to read my books, because I think they're good. And B, I think there's a lot of good stuff in there for kids. Um, Not just the representation, but, a positive romantic
Message.
relationships and things like
Yeah.
that. Um, and unless you're going to dump a lot of money into advertising, and most authors can't do that, if you self-publish, you are, and even the people who do publish through companies, unless you're a big name, you do most of the promoting yourself. And the easiest way to do that is just to try and constantly, through social media, through meeting with people, book fairs, that kind of thing,
Right.
get your name out and get your book in front of people. And eventually, hopefully it catches.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's like anything, if you're not, um, like an influencer with 1 million followers already,
Right.
right? Then you do have to play a bit of the waiting game, but just stay positive. Like, what you've got is valuable. It's going to add value to some people's lives, and it will happen. Like, just don't stop. And that actually leads me to my next question. Like, what advice would you give someone, or even a teacher? Because I know that there are
Mhm.
teachers out
Right.
there who have books in their mind, especially because there's stories every day from the students themselves. But if they wanted to start writing, what would your advice be?
You know what's funny? If you want to see tell someone that you wrote a book and watch what happens, because the minute I put out Marcia and I was like, hey, I wrote a book, uh, dude who teaches in our math department. Oh, really? I wrote one too. And he's got like a military thriller, they blew up the
Really?
shuttle and kidnapped the vice president and all this kind of
What?
stuff. And he'd written that a couple of years before. Um, our English teacher came. Oh, yeah, I wrote a book too. And she wrote a kid's story, a children's novel with her sister. Her sister illustrated it. I've got a copy of that in my classroom. Our counselor came. She wanted to write a book of, a nonfiction self-help kind of book. Um, the assistant principal who came through, he's got 4 self-help novels, or self-help books. So whether you've got a novel in your head or you want to write nonfiction or whatever, the cool thing is, self-publishing now is so easy.
Hmm.
And the thing to watch out for is there's companies that'll rip you off, that will try and publish your book for you, even though that part of it is free. You still have to try and get someone to edit for you. You still need to try and get someone to do your cover for you, which again, thankfully, I've got a large village and I know how to do some of that stuff myself. That cuts down on the costs. But the actual publishing itself, whether you use Amazon or Ingram or one of the other companies, you can
Hmm.
do that for free because it's print on demand. And so because of that, I mean, I think they said 2020, there were 1 million new books dropped on Amazon that year.
I believe it with
Um,
the KDP, yeah, with the
yeah.
direct
Mhm.
publishing. Yeah, I would
The
believe that.
the I did one month, I'm going through social media and Facebook and and this lady says, "Oh yeah, my 5-year-old wrote a book and put it out in 2020 and put it out." I was like, okay, well I give up now. Everybody's putting out books.
Yeah.
So I actually found out about print on demand, and Kindle Direct Publishing, KDP, as you mentioned, is what I use, because a student of mine who writes poetry, hey, Mr. Chico, I have a book of poetry out. Would you like to buy my book? And I was like, how did you get a book of poetry out? This was like 2018. So a couple
Mm.
of years before me. And she talked me through here's how it works and print on demand. And, so she could put out her book of poetry for, next to nothing cost wise. And, you may not sell a ton, but that's not really the point anyway, right? It's to get your work out there, get
Hmm.
feedback, you know, share your work with people. Um, and so for people who want to start writing, I usually tell them just, start writing. And the other thing is don't worry so much about how you're doing it compared to other people. Because like I said, the other thing that you learn is that there's always different ways to do it, right? Some people are very organized and they plot everything out. And I've got my 3 book series already plotted out in my head and notebooks full of notes and this kind of thing. And then I've got a friend who writes 80s romance. Um, and she just sits down and starts writing. She's a therapist and I'm just start, she doesn't plan out anything. I'm somewhere in the middle, and you're going to find that most people are somewhere in the middle. But the thing is, find a technique that works for you. Don't worry about, some people, you have to write 1,000 words a day and you have to sit. No, you don't. You don't.
No.
That works for some people. And if it works for you, do it. But if it doesn't, find the thing that works for you and go for it. And,
Yeah, I
give
think
it a
even
shot and
like
try.
committing to like, 20 minutes a day, right? It's
Yeah.
moving that needle 1%, 1% forward,
hmm
1% forward. So if that's all
I
you can
try
commit
and
to,
write every
then
day if I can. I don't always get
yeah.
to because life is busy. But it's less like it's not I'm going to sit down and force myself to write. It's that I've got these ideas in my head and I can't wait to get them out. So, when I sit down to write, it's more something I'm looking forward to, you know, and I try and fit it in more than feel like I have to fit it in.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Yeah, that's great advice. Absolutely. So with regards to your teaching career, so I know that you teach at an art school, which just explain that to me a little bit. So it's different than a
Right.
mainstream school, is that right?
Right. So we're a public high school, but we specialize in the arts. So we've got some schools around us that are career and technical centers. So they teach like drafting and um, automotive and construction and that kind of thing.
Okay.
And so the kids would go there for half a day and then go to their regular high school for English, science, math. We're not like that. We teach the core classes and the art classes. So my kids will have 3 hours or 3 classes of electives, and then also science, English, math, social studies, Spanish, all that kind of stuff. I teach video production. So when you come to our school, you would pick a major, basically kind of like you do when you're in college, and you would either go into the dance program or band or vocal or, radio, TV or whatever. Um, and sometimes we have kids who are really talented and dabble and do back and forth, and they're in band and they're in vocal and they dance and whatever. But
Right.
most of the kids come in and they pick one program to stick with. But we're also just a normal high school in that science teachers, English teachers, math, and all that kind of stuff in the same building. So we have elective programs just like normal high schools do. It's just much more expanded, and we the arts is as focused on as the academic stuff. Not to the detriment of the academic stuff, but the kids come to us because they really want to study the arts. The middle school, one of the middle school kids that we were talking to the other day saw Art School Blues, and she's like, "Why'd you call it art school if it's supposed to take place in a high school?" And I had to explain to her that there are schools
Ah,
like this that the arts is as big a part of it as the academic part, and that a lot of cities have these kind of schools. They're usually private, and we aren't. We're a public school. As long as you can audition, you don't have to pay to. There's no tuition fee or anything like that. So we love that because we get a lot of kids from the city who normally wouldn't be able to attend a school like ours who get to attend a school like ours, and that's really cool.
yeah, that's amazing. And what do you love the most about your students?
Mm. Um, One of the things that really keeps me going and what I love about teaching, so I teach a creative art, right? Because I teach video production and that kind of thing. But even when I taught English and history, right? Being able to see the kids and how they handle things creatively and typically in ways that I wouldn't. I love seeing what they're going to come up with, um, from the music choices that they use in their projects. Not music I would have picked, but it works.
Yeah.
How they handle the project or the scenes they come up with. The thing I tell people is, I'm 50 now. I've been doing video production since I was about 18. So when you do something that long, you kind of get set in, here's how I would do it. Here's how I've done it
Yeah.
before. So here's how I'm going to do it again. My kids don't have that because this is all new to them. So they find really creative, they're not tied down to the idea of here's how we've done it before. So
Yeah.
they are really, they really think outside the box. And again, not just the video classes, but my English classes and stuff too. I'd give them creative projects and see how they tackle it. I remember one year, one of my kids did Romeo and they had to rewrite something, and they chose Romeo and Juliet, and they did a gender swapped Romeo and Juliet. And
Okay.
so even with that, the way she understood the story well enough to where, Romeo was a girl, Juliet was written as a guy, but you still understood and got exactly who the character was because she understood the personality of the characters that well. That astounded me because normally they'd write the guy one way, they'd write the girl one way, right?
Right.
You could tell what she did and who each character was supposed to be, regardless of the name and regardless of the gender. And again, this is an English class. Um, and this was like my second or third year teaching, I think. It was really cool to see somebody tackle stuff that way. Um, and so it's the light bulb moment and that kind of thing is always great. But being able to see the kids tackle stuff creatively and what they come up with and how different it is than the stuff I'd come up with, I love that. That's great.
Yeah. That's so good. I love that too. So if the kids maybe are having a bad day, or you get those kids that maybe don't want to learn or they're going to be getting disruptive, like what mindset shifts do you have or
Mm,
strategies do you use
yeah.
with those students to help keep it like in a good space?
It's kind of funny because, I have my friends who teach English, Spanish, history, and all that. And they'll say things like, well, at least your kids want to come to class. And I say, usually they, but even with something like video production or dance or whatever it is, and you think,
Right.
oh, that's fun. The kids will, you still get the kids who they don't turn in work and they don't do this and and so one of the things I've gotten really good at after 20 some odd years of doing this is you learn which buttons to push for which students, right? Um,
Right.
how to motivate the kids properly because some of my kids really need a kick in the pants and some of them need just a little bit of hug and push, you know. I've got some kids who, I tell I've got some kids because I teach freshmen, sophomores, juniors, seniors, I'll have kids who come back year after year after year in my different
Right.
classes. And I've had some who freshman year pretty much worthless, don't turn anything in, can't get them to do anything. I try, nothing's happening. Sophomore year, something clicks in a little better, and I tell, I've told people with those kind of kids, the second they turn anything in, I praise the crap out of it. And I make sure they understand, you know, this is something you can do. This is not something you have to be
Mm.
scared of. You know, keep doing it. It's great. And they go, okay, it's not as hard as I thought. And they try a little bit harder and they try a little bit harder, and I've also got some kids who you kind of got to go the opposite direction. They respond better to, I hate to say it this way, to a little bit of a Gordon Ramsay. I had one
Yeah.
girl who spent like 5 minutes on a video and was like, "Oh yes, this is great. I think it's great. It, don't you, you know?" And I was like, "No, you spent 5 minutes on it, and I can tell, and here's why." And she needed that because she needed to, okay, I need to work harder, and I get that. And so the only way that works really is if you really know and understand your students, and that does take a while. And that's where having them a couple years in a row really kind of helps because that gives me extended time to kind of get to know them, which ones need which kind of approach. You don't approach all your students the same way, obviously.
Right.
And listen, I hate to say it, but there's going to be a couple that you're just not going to be able to reach, um, and you try as hard as you can, but when it happens, you focus more on the ones you can. and you move on down
And you
the
can't
road,
take it personally.
and you
I
can't take it
think
personally.
that's the
And
key,
I
right?
used to, and it used to, as an early teacher, they don't tell you
Yeah.
that, um, and that's part of the reason why the first couple of years are so hard, because you try and save everybody, and when you can't, you feel like it's you. They're failing. It must be me. I must have done something, until you look and they've got, they've been failing everything since eighth grade, or whatever. You know what I mean? Um, and sometimes it's something going on at home that they just have to get through. Maybe you can help them with, maybe you can't. I've had ones where they just need someone to sit and talk to, you know.
Mm,
Um, and one of the things I tell my students, because it helps with the fact that they're learning something new from me, right? So they're going to have a
right.
lot of questions normally. Nobody can, there's one or two kids who have like a YouTube channel or whatever, but no one comes in doing professional video. So
No,
they're going
yeah,
to ask a
no.
lot of questions. So I tell them, anything you got, any questions, I love questions. And so that opens the door for those of them that really they just need to sit and talk. They'll ask me stuff that has nothing to do with the class, right? Um, and I've developed a lot of good relationships that way with some of the kids who, they tell me about the books they've read. They tell me about, their sister and their artwork or whatever. I literally had one girl come into my classroom one day during lunch and ask me about dolphins for 30 minutes straight. You know, I was like, I don't know anything about dolphins, but I'll help you, I guess, if you want. And somebody's like,
Yeah.
why would you sit there and talk about? It's like, because if I don't if I don't do that when they come to me with the small stuff, then they're not going to do that when they come with me, come to me with the big stuff, right? They've got to feel comfortable. Um, so having an
Yeah.
open door like that, while it can be, you get asked some stupid questions and they want to talk about basketball or wrestling or video games or whatever, you're like, okay. But then when they need the help for real, or college stuff or whatever, or things going on at home, then you become someone they can trust and they come to you. And that's, that's what they need.
Yeah, that actually leads, like, I was going to ask you, then, what advice would you give new teachers who may or may not be struggling? But two pieces you just gave right now, right? Is do not take things personally. And
Yeah.
if a student does come to you with the small things, listen, because it will open the gate for them to possibly come with with the more difficult questions later, because you're building that relationship. Is there any other advice you think you would give new teachers today?
If it almost feels weird to be asked that, because it's like, I know so many people who are better teachers than I am, but um, one of the things that I think we all have in common, all those of us that quote unquote good teachers, they tell you things when you're early on, like you can't smile until like October or whatever. You have to be stern and tough, and the thing is, sometimes you do have to be. I've seen teachers college level sometimes too. Um, I've seen teachers who don't know how to explain the subject matter. I don't
Mm,
get that, but okay. I've seen teachers who don't try and connect with the students because they have to feel like, you're here and I'm here and the authority thing has to be there. When I was student teaching one year, I had a professor who came in and watched. I see that they call you Chico instead of Mr. Chico. That's a sign of disrespect. You shouldn't let them do that. I'm like, it's not. It's a sign, it's an affirmation that I'm someone they can trust. They're not looking down
mm.
on me, you know. They're still very respectful to me. And those are the kids who typically will turn things in more. They'll come to you when you need help and that kind of thing. You know, I don't go out of my way to do that. I don't try and be buddy buddy with them or anything like that. Because that doesn't work, because they read that as fake. But if you, it's
Yeah.
like anything else. If you go in being you and you're authentic, students realize that, they recognize that, and they respect that. So it's sort of like writing. Find a thing that fits with you, do that and be that, and don't try and be any other teacher than that. If you are the very straight, one of the people I taught with for like a decade, she was the other video production teacher. She was also a musician. Musicians, especially, she was church organist. She played at the Vatican one time.
Wow.
Right. Um, very, very structured because she thinks musically. Because right, and I am not that.
The
Um, and
opposite.
right, I'm very much the opposite. Um, and so she wouldn't work if she tried to teach like me, and I wouldn't work if I tried to teach like her. So, and it's tough those first couple of years because you're finding yourself out. It's the old saying, you're flying the airplane while they're still building it. Um, because you're teaching the class while you're still trying to figure out how to teach the class. Um, but if you can relax a little, figure things out, go to the other teachers for help. One of the problems with teaching is it's
Yeah.
isolating, right? You're in your classroom with your kids most of the day. And, you know, my wife, who is usually right about most things, don't tell her I said that, is very much the person who, if my fellow teachers are having a little get together and stuff, there's like, go hang out with them, be social, get to know them, because, and she's absolutely right, the people in your building are the resource that you go to when you need help, even if it's figuring out what teaching style works for you and which ones don't. Um, so yeah, don't try and do it all by yourself. And when things don't go right, don't be too hard on yourself, which is very hard to do. One of my early memories teaching, like third year maybe, which again is when most people burn out and quit. I was
Hmm.
the yearbook advisor at my school that year, and everything was going wrong, right? We were late and kids weren't working. Deadlines were missed, and I was getting chewed out by my principal and this kind of thing. And somehow my students, I'm not very good at hiding my emotions. My students knew what was going on. And one day after school, it still hits me thinking about this. Third year or so, the kids didn't know me that long. I hadn't been there that long. They came to me one day after school and they said, "Mr. Chico, you got to come over here. There's a problem. We need you. Go over to where they are. Like, here you go, Mr. Chico. This is for you." They had made me a cake, and the cake just
Oh,
right. The cake said "smile," and it had a
oh,
big smiley
so
face on it because they knew that's what I
sweet.
needed. Right. I
Yeah.
mean, when I tell you I wept, oh my God. Yeah. Um, but
It's
that
probably
was
that
also
emotional
the
release you actually needed.
God, yeah. And so, your students are a resource back to you.
Yeah.
The emotions go both ways. And you kind of have to latch on to the good things like that.
Yeah.
That was the same year that I had a parent come to me and say, "You're the reason my kid graduated." I'm like, okay. She said, because he really wanted to stay in your classes, in your video classes. And the only way we could let him do that is if he passed his other stuff. So he got it together and he passed his math and science English so that he could keep your video classes. And so really you're the only reason that he graduated, because otherwise he would have let all that stuff slip. And again, you know,
Wow.
as an early teacher, that's the kind of stuff you need to hear. You don't always hear it. You don't always get positive feedback like that. But when you do, latch onto it and remember, you've got to remind yourself of the difference you're making and the changes and stuff that
Exactly. Like,
yeah,
I think for teachers, you have to keep, anytime a positive email comes in, have a
yeah,
file in your email that you just pop it in there, right? Anytime a kid
hmm
gives you anything, or like if they bake a cake, take a picture and have
yeah,
a box or something where you can look back on it, because you're going to need that on those days where it does feel like everything kind of just spiraled out of control that day. Right? You have to know that you're doing a good job. And
yeah,
sometimes that it's those reminders. So I always tell teachers, like, keeps, records of anything that comes to you, even if it's the kids just writing you like you're the best teacher, and
yeah. I
put
have a I
that,
have a shelf in my room
yeah,
that's thank you notes and little things like that. Yeah,
exactly. No,
most
you have
definitely.
to, so I'm curious, Clint, like, have you ever experienced burnout, or do you see any teachers around you experiencing burnout? Or if not, like, what are your strategies for that, if there are teachers listening who might be dealing with that?
Yeah, it is tough. And the thing is, situations are different for teachers all over the place because a lot of that depends on the support you get, both from the people in your building and from the district. Um, I teach in a very large district, in the one of the largest ones in Michigan. And so that means that a lot of times the communication is not too personal. The opposite is my wife, who teaches in a district so small that she refers to the superintendent by his first name. Uh,
Wow, okay, that's
I
small.
talked to Eric today. I was like, okay. Um, but so a lot of times when you teach in a large district, you don't feel like you're getting the support you need because there's so many layers of bureaucracy.
Right.
Sometimes it's the principal that you teach with, sometimes it's the other teachers around you. And teaching is the kind of thing that really only works if you're getting the proper support. And that's harder and harder as budgets get cut, as priorities shift, as you see things like standardized testing take over, arts. The middle school that I just spoke to, they were like, yeah, we had to cut our art program. We still have vocal, we still have band, but we don't have any visual art classes, for the students. And I'm thinking that's insane,
Oh, it's
but it's certainly not
terrible.
unique. There's
Yeah.
schools like that all over. So again, part of it is latching onto the positive stuff,
Yeah.
um, remembering why you're doing it, and don't, you know, it goes back to the don't take everything personally. It took me a long time, 10 years at least, before I realized, if I used to be, they're not turning in the work. How dare you? I worked really hard
Hmm.
putting this whole assignment together, and then you have the audacity to sit there for a month and do nothing. And why are you breathing air, taking up space, and doing nothing in my classroom? And so you feel like it's you, right? But a lot of times it's not. A lot of times it doesn't have anything to do with you, and you don't realize that at the time. But it's the weight of the world on your shoulders times 30, times 50, times 100, times however many students you have, and that can be really tough. So you've got to kind of let that go. Don't worry about saving every student. Save as many as you can. Do the best you can for as long as you
Yeah.
can, and know that that is enough. And that's hard because you feel often like it's not enough you know,
Yeah.
um, and cling on to other teachers. Find the good ones that you can trust, and hang on to
I
them.
think that that is key. Find the ones that you can trust and find the ones that are like vibrating on the same energy that you are, right?
Yeah,
Like, make sure that in order to cultivate a more positive experience, you have to find those positive teachers because you also sometimes do need to vent, but you want
yeah,
to know that what you say is not going to be the topic of discussion at the
yeah.
staff room the next day, right? So you need kind of that safe
And I know
person.
teachers have run into that with social media too. They've posted stuff and then it got back to the boss, and you're like, dude, I told.
Yeah,
So
be
yeah,
careful.
that's. Mhm.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, you've got to navigate carefully. So no, that's very, very good advice. And yeah, and just keep setting your boundaries. I think that's also super important. So other than your own books, Clint, any books you recommend for like personal or professional development that you've read before?
Hmm. Um, Professional development. I mean, there's the books out there that they tell new teachers to read all the time, and the first day of school, and the porcupine one that I can't remember the title of. Um,
I also can't
most of
remember.
most of the stuff that I've learned. Listen, I was in TV news for like 5 years before I became a teacher, and I taught in a classroom for like 2 or 3 years before I got certified.
Okay.
Um, so everything I learned about teaching was kind of on the fly. I learned more about teaching from the other teachers than I did from stuff in a book. The books that I recommend to people often are the fiction ones,
Okay.
that they should be sharing with their kids and sharing with their students and things. Um, because my own students come to me for recommendations and stuff too. There's a
Okay.
book
What?
that I recommend to pretty much everybody who reads fiction,
Yeah.
regardless of your age, teenager or adult or whatever. It's called With the Fire on High by Elizabeth Acevedo. First off, she's a great author, and she writes about Hispanic characters. So you have, characters that are diverse and that kind of thing. And
Okay.
in this one, she's a teen mom who is trying to finish high school and become a chef. And um, cooking is her love language. It's kind of how she, well, my friend has an anniversary coming up. I'm going to cook them a great meal and this kind of thing. And so it talks about her love of food and and that kind of thing. And so you have both the family part where she's a teen mom, her grandma helps take care of her, and that kind of thing. But then you also have a teenager really trying to push through, overcome things, Um, she's driven. She's not going to let, things slow her down and that kind of and that's a great role model too. And there's very good positive relationship stuff in there. I always in my own books, because somebody online posted one time, not too long ago, oh, this TV show has these two kids kissing and they're like 14, not kids, teenagers. They shouldn't show them kissing. That it's like, listen, I got a lot of kids in my classes and other classes who don't have positive relationship models around them. Everybody
Right.
that they know is either divorced or cheating on each other, that kind of thing. Mom and dad are yelling at each other, whatever. You don't know what they're seeing at home. And there's already tons of TV shows and movies and books and stuff where, oh yeah, they're cheating, they're going back and forth
Yeah.
and hopping,
Yeah.
right? You need to see somewhere in there positive relationships modeled out, right? How to get through problems together without breaking up and without yelling and screaming and throwing things. And so with the fire on high, she's a teen mom. She still gets along with the dad. They're not together, but they have a cordial relationship. And the dad is not deadbeat. He's not a bum. He's a teenager, so he's doing his best too, but he's still there. She meets a guy that she's into, but she's also like, look, I'm going to become a chef and I'm going to work on. So there's a lot of really positive
That's
things in there
great.
that kids need to see. A lot of times, you look at what do kids need to learn and this kind of thing, and you think automatically to nonfiction, but you learn so much about how to deal with people and relationships and experiences and stuff from fiction.
Absolutely.
So
That's
there's
great.
a
I wrote
reason
it
we
down.
teach
So we're
fiction
gonna,
in literature class.
yeah, no, yeah, yeah.
There's
I'm
good
gonna
stuff in
put
there.
that in the show notes because yeah, I'll have my friend's daughter. I'm definitely gonna recommend that book to her. I think she would really,
Plus,
really
it's a
enjoy
lot of
it.
fun.
Yeah,
It's not
cool.
one of
Thank
those where you
you.
feel like I'm going to sit and learn something. No, it's a lot of fun too.
Yeah, awesome. So going into like mindset for a little bit, like what are your strategies for moving yourself from a negative
Mm.
mindset into a positive mindset?
That is tough. So the thing about writing is it only works if people read your books. And I've had, the my first Marcia book, I think I sold about 100 copies at this point, and it's been out for about 4 years. And then the sequel sold fewer, and then the third one and the fourth one sold about like 8 copies. So you get to a point where you're like, why does no one want to read my books? Why am I spending months on it? I've had some that Wayward Magic is the fantasy book that I just put out. It's getting huge reviews, not a lot of sales, but it's slowly building. But I've put
Yeah.
some books out that sit there for months, and you know, a couple of my friends buy copies, and that's pretty much it. And so it's real easy when you're doing something like that, when you're doing something creative, you put your heart into it and you throw stuff out there. And that's one of the scary things about writing is if I spend a week on a project and it's the response is okay, whatever, then I spend a week on it. Most of my books I spend 6 months, 8 months putting out.
Right.
That's scary. So it's real easy to get down when things don't necessarily work, teaching and writing both. Um, Again, like you said, latch on to the positive stuff. I do like there'll be times I'll go back and I'll look at my reviews and stuff, and even my books that don't sell a lot, I'll get stuff back like, I really love your book. One of my favorite ones, Art School Blues, which again is the Romeo and Juliet type one. I got
Yeah.
one review back. It was one sentence. I adore your books, but I can't stop crying. And I'm like, well, that was kind of the job. So good. I got a text once from my cousin for the first Marcia book. She's in Canada. Sent me a text, said, I just got past the part with Noche Buena, which is Hispanic Christmas Eve. In that part, Marcia and her friends get together and they do something special for this girl they know who had just tried to kill herself, is going through some really down times. And so they get together to do something for her. And my cousin wrote me and said, um, I was so moved by this part and the whole Christmassy of it and everything, that she said, I got to the end of the chapter. I closed the book, stopped reading. I put Christmas music on and lit candles
Oh,
because I just wanted to keep that happy Christmas feeling, going.
oh, that's
Um,
so
and right.
beautiful.
So I saved that text. And when she sent it, I was thinking, it's August. I got this girl playing Christmas music and thinking, and all these
Yeah.
happy vibes in August. So, or someone actually sent me, I didn't know this person, sent me a thing that said, the world is better because your books are in it.
Oh my
I know, right?
gosh.
I was like, are you kidding me? So, when things are hard and I'm looking at, because on Amazon, unfortunately, just like all social media, you can go on every day and see how many sales you've had and who's
Yes.
reading your book on, Kindle Unlimited and things like that. And there are times where, no matter what author you are, pretty much, you'll have flatline, nobody,
Yeah.
nobody, nobody. And that can be hard, and so that's when you've got to pull out the happy thoughts and look and to somebody you're making a difference.
Yeah.
um Somebody else said, I wish this for the first Marcia, I wish this book had been out when I was struggling to come out as a teenager, and she's in her 20s now, late 20s. I wish this book had been out when I was struggling to come out. And so things like that are both in the teaching world and in the writing world, things like that you got to latch on to for when the times are low,
Yeah, that's
and know that it'll get
very
better.
true. That's very true. You should even maybe ask your students about how you could market your books on different
This is
social
true
media
because, yeah,
platforms.
teenagers are very
They'd,
much more social media adapt than I
yeah, they'd
am.
probably have great ideas. So you should
Yeah.
definitely keep that in mind just to ask them. And last question for today, Clint, on what three things are you most grateful for today?
What am I grateful for? First and foremost, the I mentioned before, my village, the people around me, my support
Mm-hmm.
system is
Yeah,
incredible. I'm more thankful for that than anything. I'm not just my wife, who's wonderful, my kids who are wonderful, my family, um, but my distant relatives, my friends, my coworkers, everybody, the support I've gotten both as a teacher and an author is incredible, you know.
that's
Um,
great.
so that first and foremost. Second, I'm gonna say, you know what? It's as nice as it is when your mom or your wife says your books are really good. That's awesome. It's great.
Yep.
My mom is a really tough critic too. It's great, but when people you've never met before say really good things about your books, Island Games, I got one time, a review that started off, I am obsessed. Everyone must read this book. I'm like, dude. So
Nice. That's
the
fantastic.
fans that I've gotten who I've never met before, but somehow my book finds their way into their hands, and I get, listen, especially if it's a small author, especially if they're an indie published author. If you have 5 seconds to go online and write them a review or drop give them a rating or whatever, please do that, because that kind of feedback, we don't get it much, but we really need it. We need to know. And even if it wasn't a great book and you want to tell them
Yeah.
that too, we need that kind of feedback too, so that our work improves.
Yeah, that's
So,
good. That's a good
and
point.
the third thing I'm going to say, programs like this where we get to talk to people about our books, because listen,
Yeah.
the one thing we like more than writing is talking about our writing. Well, except some authors don't, but I'll say for a lot of us, my wife said one time, I have an on-off switch. Either I sit and say nothing, or you turn me on and I won't shut up. And usually, if I'm talking about soccer or books, uh,
Uh, well, I'm
so
glad you talked as much as you did today. I think you dropped a lot of value, a lot of valuable information for people listening. And I'm really grateful to you, Clint, for coming on the show today. And just, I really appreciate what you're doing for students in your area in Michigan,
well,
and
thank you.
also for anyone who's reading your books. And I just wish you the most success as you move
Oh, thank you.
forward. It's going to get better, better and better. So thank you so much.